Good morning, everyone. Captain Dirk doing another guide on Mechabellum. This time, a strategy guide on how to play against the Elite SCP. The match I'm using for this demonstration was played against a high-level Russian player that I had never beaten before this match. So not only is it a good guide on how to play against the Elite SCP, but it's a match that personally I'm very proud of. To quickly break down the early deployment, I started with Crawler and Mustang. Crawler and Mustang are light units, and they aren't great against high health single units, so I backed them up with a first round purchase of 2 snipers, which I deployed so that they would be behind the Crawlers and the Mustangs by the time the fighting started. Recapping the combat of the first round, I lost rather handily. I covered this in the last video, but winning round 1 is not overly important. It gives value if you want to level up your units, but it's not critical to win the game. At this point in the game, my main goal is to keep my elite SCP opponent on their back foot, so round 2 troop choice is 2 rhinos. The rhino requires some very specific counters to properly put it in the dirt, so my elite opponent is going to have to make a choice. Counter the rhino, or ignore the rhino and hope they can level up their snipers enough to take it out. In a move that caught me off guard, my opponent bought themselves a rhino. The level 3 rhino that the elite SCP can recruit is incredibly potent. It spawns in with enough health to easily solo some starting armies. My left flank collapsed under the weight of that level 3 rhino, but on the right side, my 2 rhinos in my army have successfully eliminated his forces and pushed into his base. He's gonna have to do something about that if I can manage to counter the rhino on the left. The rest of this round is going to play out rather slowly, so I would just like to take a moment to thank my opponent. Seriously, playing this guy has made me a much better player. Playing a lot of the people from the Chinese and Russian regions who've had this game for longer is the best way to level up. Don't be afraid of that 15k ranked player. Play that match, lose that game. The strategies that they employ against you are going to be invaluable as you move forward. So just pay attention to what they're doing that's kicking your ass. Right here is actually a really good example of what a level 3 rhino can do against level 1 units. They simply don't have the damage to kill it in a reasonable amount of time. Coming out of losing the first 2 rounds into round 3, I have to start making some moves to stem the bleeding. To do that, I am going to counter his level 3 rhino with some mauls. You may remember my affinity for balls from last game. They are an amazing way to support your light units with their fast speed and high HP. We're now moving into round 3. I have moved my rhino to a flanking position, which was a noob amateur move. It was immediately evaporated by his level 3 rhino and the level 3 sniper. My balls also underperform, you can quote that. They get caught up on the rhino, which is good. However, they don't have enough units in front of them to soak up the tanks and the arc light. They're quickly defeated and have negligible impact on the rhino. It's worth noting that wherever that level 3 rhino is not, my army is succeeding handily. The left flank was able to quickly push through and destroy his base pylon, and the right flank is still not completely dead. While I lose this round, it's looking fairly good for me. The rest of it's going to play out pretty slow. I'm going to speed up the footage for you, and we'll get on to round 4. Round 4 is my best chance at this point in the game to start shaking things up in a big way. I've got big money at 800 credits, so I use that to pick up the defensive shield with the plan of putting it on a melting point. Melting point doesn't have access to shields by default, so this is actually a fairly big upgrade to help keep the rest of my army safe. To explain my reasoning behind the melting point requires counters with its high HP pool, and it's extremely good at killing high HP single targets, like that rhino, or the tanks, or the arc lights, or the sniper. With my leftover credits, I'm going to upgrade the rest of my army. Upgrading the rest of my army is going to bring it closer to parity with the level 3 units that my opponent is spawning. During this round, pay special attention to how the new decisions perform. The melting point should have a good impact on the rhino, and the shield should protect my units. If neither of those things happen, my decision making was poor. Off the bat, the rhino is picked up by my balls. My balls get deleted, and the rhino moves on to softer targets. However, by this point, the melting point has its target. So far, I would call my decision making a tentative success. Holding on to the right flank for longer, even if it didn't win, would have a positive effect because of how much my left side is winning. The left side, having crushed his forces, has moved to help my melting point, and now we're winning rounds. It took until round 4, but we've managed to turn around a rough early game into what could be a very threatening mid game. Round 5 card selection brings up one of my favorite cards in the game, the tank production line. Putting the tank production line on a gigantic unit will cause it to spawn tanks during the round. Producing extra reinforcements during the round has amazing tactical benefit. Chiefly among them against an elite player is that the tanks will help pull sniper fire off of your gigantic units. I'm continuing to upgrade my army in an effort to keep up with my elite opponent, and I'm putting my new gigantic unit on the left flank. The left flank has been winning, but the right flank barely won. If I'm to keep winning this game, we need to keep stalling that right side and win the left side even harder. I chose to go fortress on my left flank because the fortress is very different from the rest of my army and is going to require a bespoke counter or some major change by my opponent. We're keeping along that theme of keeping an elite player on the back foot so that they can't focus down on their real plan. You can see now that my opponent went with balls. I respect the ball player, however the fortress is actually amazing at killing balls. It's able to one-shot them, and it has a decent fire rate, allowing it to kill them faster than a melting point. My melting point on the right side nearly died to the balls, highlighting the difference between a fortress and a melting point in that matchup. Unfortunately, even though the way I'm playing works, we're going to have to wait a while for this round to end, as my units march from the left side where I won to the right side where I stalled. In the meantime, let's talk about what the elite player might be planning, because understanding your opponent's plan is one of the most important factors to winning the game. If you watched my elite video, you would have picked up on the value of elite snipers and elite arc lights. But what I didn't show in that game, because it wasn't required, is how potent elite can play a fortress. Fortress has access to 2 technologies that make it a great candidate for the elite army. It has the elite marksman perk, which increases its damage and range based on the unit's rank. It also has a technology that doubles its fire rate at the cost of a little bit of range. Those 2 technologies in conjunction are incredibly potent against nearly any unit. In round 6, my deployment is a little less obvious. I go for the shield upgrade on my fortress to help my front line survive a bit longer against the arc light and the tanks. I also go for the technology on balls, which causes them to split into crawlers upon death. Splitting into crawlers not only helps my front line have just a few extra units, but if you think about it, when a baller in a line dies and the crawlers from its body run forward, what is the sniper's next target? It's the crawlers. So the crawlers actually keep the ballers even safer. Like we were talking about at the end of the last round, one of Elite's goals might be to play Fortress, and my opponent has done it. This is where some of my earlier tactics start to make even more sense. I could have done any number of things to play against the Rhino, but I chose balls and I chose melting points. The advantage that balls and melting points have over snipers and Phoenix is that they're also very good against gigantic units like the Fortress. However, because I didn't deploy new units or shake up my plan, my opponent's choice to spawn a Fortress was big enough to win this round for them. Most critical to the Fortress's success was its placement away from my melting point. I'm going to take that into account when I place my units in the next round. I've already demonstrated the supremacy of my front line compared to theirs, So what I need to be thinking about next round is what it's going to take to keep my front line alive and make that big unit very dead. Being at half health now, this round is going to be very important. Gigantic units on the field mean 400 life each when they survive at the end of a round. With that in mind, I'm going to try to win this round and win it handily. I spawn a melting point on my left flank to deal with that fortress that my opponent deployed, and I went for the Vulcan's Descent card, which is going to spawn a Vulcan I put inside the shield. Many of my units are also ranking up to level 3, putting them on par with my opponent's elite spawns. For round 7, observe how the new deployments perform. The new melting point on the left side should have a big impact on that fortress, and on the right side we no longer have the rhino as my opponent has redeployed it. The new melting point has picked up the rhino as its first target and quickly tears through its HP, while my front line continues to distract the fortress. Coming from my back line now, you can see some missile artillery. I bought Stormcallers because my opponent had Fangs. Level 3 Fangs still get one-shot by Stormcaller artillery, making them a cheap 200 credit option to help soften up your opponent's frontline fodder. Because of the missile's ability to tear through my opponent's front line, the left flank wins and is able to topple the enemy fortress, keeping my Vulcan, fortress, melting point, and supporting units all alive to deal with the enemy's last level 3 fortress. Again, because of my strategy, this round is going to play out pretty slowly. Thinking about the next round, I'm looking at my front line and I'm seeing very few units remaining. However, I'm getting huge value out of crawlers, so the plan is to deploy more melting points because I already have the technology to spawn crawlers. Similarly to the ability of my fortress to deploy tanks, having extra crawlers is going to keep the enemy snipers, which elite likes, and fortress preoccupied and off of my more valuable damage dealing units. Because of how happy I was with the performance of the Stormcaller ripping up my enemy's front line, this round I'm going to upgrade my units and deploy another detachment of Stormcallers on my right flank. This is not the choice I expected to win the game, however, it fits extremely well into the rest of my army, costs me very little, and allows me to see what my opponent is going to do, possibly adjust and end the game. With the money that I saved by deploying Stormcallers, I've put a tech upgrade on my melting point to fire electromagnetic missiles. Electromagnetic missiles disable the tech of units that they hit. The elite marksman tech, range upgrade tech, and rate of fire techs can all be disabled by this missile upgrade. Because of Elite's dependence on these technologies, I believe that having the electromagnetic missiles was more worth it than the range upgrade on the melting point. As the round continues, you can see that the crawlers coming from my melting points are doing an amazing job of distracting the enemy fortresses, but the moment that I run out of crawlers, the enemy fortresses are quick to dispatch them. The round itself is shaping up into another slow loss. Now, I kind of had a feeling that would happen. When I didn't make a big deployment and waited to see what my opponent would do, I gave them the initiative. And using that initiative, they deployed another fortress and managed to get through my crawler front line. To remedy that issue, we need to go big mode on crawlers. I could deploy 3 units of level 2 crawler, but I think it would be more efficient if I deployed more melting points to spawn the crawlers themselves. The advantage that melting points have over spawning just the crawler squadrons themselves is that the crawlers are going to replenish throughout the match, and I'm going to have that ability to drop fortresses using the melting points laser. Aside from just unit deployment, we need to consider the cards on the table. I have only 656 HP remaining, and I don't trust that to survive whatever units he may win with. The only option here is a big win. So, to do the plan that I talked about before, we're going to spawn 2 more melting points. I bought the Acid Splash for my card upgrade, and I purchased the nuke from my tower. It's entirely possible that my opponent would counter doing the same thing, and there was no option to go halfway. Now that I've finished my deployment, you can see that my opponent did in fact go for the Electrical Storm card. Electrical Storm is incredibly potent with the ability to wipe out an entire flank's worth of light units. Lightning Storm is less effective against large HP pools, so I believe it won't penetrate my shield, and my melting points will be safe along with their storm callers. Discussing the nuke is hard countered by shields. It's a large damage AoE, however the shield's ability to block at least one instance of damage can completely nullify a nuke. My worry here is that my melting points won't get into range in time to destroy his shields and allow the nuke to hit. But my concern is immediately nullified by my choice to get the electromagnetic missile. The EMP missile has one effect that I didn't mention before. Each one does substantial damage to shield, allowing a single volley to do over half the damage of a shield, meaning that my 2 melting points per side were able to easily defeat the shields that my opponent deployed. Shields were taken down so fast on the left side that my acid splash got full value, with none of its area being obstructed by the shield. And on the right side, they were able to take it out before the 15 seconds had elapsed and the nuke dropped. I hope this video has been helpful in understanding the strategy and decision making that goes into a Mechabellum match. If you have questions, please put them in the comments. I'm going to be reading them almost every day. I stream every week on Twitch, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday. I do whatever I want over there. Come check it out. I've been Captain Dirk. Thanks for watching.
Simple. We're just going to keep using melting points.
Melting points will be spawned until the game is won. My balls.
My balls.
Oh, yes, yes. Bye-bye, shield. Bye-bye, shield. Woo! Nuke time.